In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Today is the 5th Sunday of Great Lent. Only a week until Palm Sunday, and only 2 weeks until Pascha. Pascha is in sight. We have been fasting, and we are hungry. But what are we hungry for? The Gospel reading this morning presents us with a question that, when asked of us, powerfully reveals what it is we are hungry for. What do you want me to do for you? This is a question that Jesus asks the brothers James and John. What would you ask for? Perhaps you'd ask for a good job, better health, a long life, fame, fortune, a big house, a good partner, good children. Or perhaps you think those things are too self-centered, and you'd give the beauty pageant answer. Oh, I just wish for world peace. I wish for a cure to cancer. I wish for all suffering to end. But what is it that you would ask Jesus in a quiet moment when there was no other audience, when you thought nobody else was listening, as James and John did? What would you ask for? What is your heart's desire? It is clear that James and John do not really understand what it is they are asking. And it is clear from Jesus' response that they shouldn't really be asking it. So what should they have asked? What should we ask? Well, Jesus has already given the answer before they even ask. Just a few verses before they ask, Jesus says, "This is what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to go to Jerusalem for you, and I'm going to be betrayed for you. I'm going to be condemned to death and delivered over to the Gentiles. And for you, I'm going to be spat on, mocked, scourged, and killed. And then for you, I am going to rise again." Having been promised all of this, James and John shouldn't have to have asked for anything more if they'd understood what Jesus had just promised them. But they didn't. Just as we so often do not understand and appreciate all that Jesus has done for us. As is said in our reading in the Epistle to the Hebrews, what Christ has done for us in his death and resurrection is to give us the complete cure. To give us the complete cure for our broken lives, purifying our flesh and purifying our conscience. And this is what Mary of Egypt discovered, St. Mary of Egypt discovered, when she encountered the holy cross of Christ. On the 5th Sunday of Great Lent each year, we commemorate St. Mary of Egypt. Mary loved the world, and she lived to indulge her flesh. Mary's story is not a nice story, but it is dramatic and it is beautiful. It is the story of a woman who was brought from the depths of depravity to the heights of holiness. And so her story is one of hope for each one of us. And it is the ultimate expression of what Great Lent should be for each one of us. Mary lived in the 4th century, and when she was about 13, she ran away from home and headed to the big city, where she lived a life of unbridled immorality. We know in the world that there is a tragic reality of many young women who find themselves alone, helpless and vulnerable, and they are forced, whether by violence, threat or need, into lives of sexual immorality. But this is not the case for Mary. Mary just loved living that way. In fact, although Mary lived like a prostitute, she refused to take any money. Instead, she lived by begging and spinning flax. Mary did not live this way because she had to, but because she loved to. She loved the world, and she loved pleasure. She gave in to every lust that she had, and she lived this way for 17 years. Then one day, in the great city of Alexandria, where she was, she encountered a group of pilgrims who were traveling to Jerusalem. And she thought, well, it might be fun to tag along. And so using her body as currency, she bought her way onto the ship, onto the voyage. And as she arrived in Jerusalem, she carried on living her same sinful lifestyle. Until the day of the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross, which we had 2 weeks ago. On this day, she saw the massive crowds going to the Holy Sepulchre. I always struggle with that word. This is the church that was built over the place of Jesus' tomb. And they were going to the service of the Holy Cross. And so she went along to see what was going on. And as she reached the doorway, she found she couldn't go in. She literally couldn't cross the threshold. As hard as she tried, as the crowds were coming in, she could just not get in. She found a quiet corner in the courtyard and was touched suddenly by the grace of God, and she began to cry. And she realized it was her own sins that were preventing her from entering and seeing the service. Broken-hearted, she looked up and saw an icon of the Theotokos. This woman of complete immorality, this Mary of complete immorality, looked upon the eyes of the most pure Mary, the most pure woman that has ever lived. And Mary of Egypt opened her heart to Mary, the Mother of God, and begged her to let her into this building. Let me see the cross on which Christ died, the cross on which he saved the sinners, even one as I am, and be witness before your Son that I am leaving this life behind. I will never again so dishonor my body. I will renounce the entire world and live for him. In this one moment, Mary was overwhelmed by a wave of love, and she went back to the doorway and entered the service of the exaltation of the Holy Cross. There she saw the true cross, the cross on which Christ was crucified. And there she experienced the true love and forgiveness of Jesus. And then she asked, what must I do next? Where should I go? How may I best serve Christ? And she heard a voice that said if she would cross the Jordan River, she would find glorious rest. And so the very next day, that's exactly what she did, and she entered the desert. We have the life of Saint Mary of Egypt thanks to Saint Zosimas, who met her in the desert one day. And when she met him, she told him that from the day she entered the desert until the day she met him that day, that time had passed was 47 years. And in those 47 years, she had not seen another single human being. Having encountered the love of the cross, Saint Mary of Egypt forsook the world and devoted her life completely to God. 47 years she lived in the desert with God. And she told Saint Zosimas that the first 17 years of that 47, the first 17 years was spent wrestling against the temptations, lusts, and memories of her old life. And that after 17 years, the years matching her years of sinful living, then she suddenly felt a bright and radiant peace. Let us return to James and John for a moment. We know what they were asking, don't we? They were asking, can we have the 2 best spots in your kingdom, please? But let us ask, what does it really look like to be on Christ's left and right? James and John ask, grant to us that we may sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory. There is another place, just a few chapters later, where St. Mark uses the same wording, chapter 15, where he speaks of Christ's crucifixion and says, with him they also crucified 2 rebels, one on his right hand and one on his left. When James and John make their request, Jesus says to them, you don't know what you are asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and to be baptized with the baptism which I will be baptized? He's speaking of his death. This is what it looks like to be on Christ's right and his left. It looks like to carry our cross. It looks like to die to the world, have all the world die to us. It looks like being crucified and dying with him. And this is what St. Mary of Egypt found, knew and learned. When the voice told her that if she went into the wilderness she would find glorious rest, it was not that she would find an oasis of date palms and cool running water. Glorious rest came in living a life away from the world, denying the flesh, resisting her lusts, a life of wrestling. This is the only way we can come into the glorious rest of Christ. To be crucified to the world with him. James and John reveal their heart's desire in what they ask, as do we whenever we ask of it. So what we must teach our hearts to want to ask is not, Lord, what can you do for me today? Because we know that we already have everything we need in him and from him. And so instead, we must learn from St. Mary of Egypt to instruct our hearts to ask, Lord, what can I do for you today? That must become our heart's true desire, to do what Jesus commands, to follow him. Let me just close with St. Zosimas. He of course has his own story, and this is just part of it. But he finds himself actually a little like James and John. He entered the monastery when he was literally just weaned from his mother. He spent his whole life as a monastic, and he was very, very good at it. He earned everyone's respect with his strict ascetic living and wisdom, but this led him to begin to think that he was perfect and that he needed no instruction from anyone. And he said to himself, is there a man in the desert, meaning in all the wilderness of asceticism, is there a man in the desert who has surpassed me in holiness? And then the Lord brings Mary of Egypt to meet with him and answer his question. Having met St. Mary of Egypt, St. Zosimus prayed, Christ our God, how blessed are you for showing your servant how far I am from perfection. We are coming towards the end of Lent. How are you doing? Maybe you think you've done well. Perhaps there is some pride rising in you as you think about how well you are fasting. Learn from St. Zosimus. Look at St. Mary of Egypt and see how far away you are from perfection. Or perhaps you're feeling crushed and a failure. Maybe you haven't done well in your fasting and you're ready to pack it in. Learn from St. Mary that it takes time. It takes time to overcome our passions. It takes time to subdue our flesh. For St. Mary, it took 17 years to overcome her past, the time equal to the time of her sinful past. How many years have we neglected the fast? and now we expect to conquer it and ourselves in our first year? Take heart. We may experience the calling and inspiration in a moment, but it takes years of ascetic effort and discipline and prayer to learn true humility and holiness. The end of Great Lent is fast approaching. Now is not the time to let fatigue set in. It is time to double down. Do not let this opportunity to draw close to Christ pass you by. Enter the desert with St. Mary. Enter the desert with Christ. Forsake the world and be changed. If St. Mary can be, so can you. Let us, with St. Zosimus, look at St. Mary of Egypt and pray, Christ our God, how blessed are you for showing your servant how far I am from perfection. Amen.